the caste system in India. Right? I guess to start us off, I can show you a visual of the caste system. So this is the god Brahma, and he's like known for being the creator of human beings. And the caste, or basically, people were divided into 5 groups. So in the top, we have the Brahmins, who are the priests and teachers. In the middle, you have the Kshatriyas, who are the warriors and rulers. And then you have the Vaishyas, who are the farmers, traders, and merchants. And then in the bottom, you have Shudras, who are laborers. Now, this is where controversies come in with talking about the group called Dalits. These were people who were completely outside of society and were considered outcasts, just merely being born into these communities. So they did jobs that were considered to be impure. So yeah, this is the visual for that. Hey, Mo has joined us. Mo, do you want to start us off with the history of? Yeah, I was just talking about the visual, and now you can start us off with the history of the Hindu caste system.
Oh yeah, I'm really sorry that I'm a little bit late. I was having some technical difficulties, but so starting off with the history of the Hindu caste system is that it was perceived to be extremely old, about 3,000 years old, and it was mentioned in the Manusmriti, which is Hindu law, and it's extremely important in several parts of India, and it acknowledges and justifies the caste system and is the basis of order and regularity of the society. For centuries, the caste has dictated almost every aspect of Hindu religious and social life, with each group occupying a specific place in this complex hierarchy. And in Indian society, the group comes first, unlike our own society that gives much more importance to individuality. And after the person's family, the caste commands an individual's major loyalty. And some more history about the Hindu caste system is there's a jati, which is the idea of lineage or kinship of the group, and each group has a justified or specific job, and it's related to purity and pollution. And there are perhaps about 3,000 jatis in India, and there's no one all Indian system of ranking, and it's just kind of generalized. And the prominence of segregation in the rural communities, there is a prominence of segregation in rural communities, and a jati is identified in a local setting by the exchange of food and water, and people will try to marry their children to members of the same jati, just like the same caste, and will give them major loyalty to their jati. And there isn't, so like jatis aren't like that much prominent in India itself, but there is discrimination within lower caste and upper caste. And because discrimination was outlawed in India, there's more like systemic not racism, but systemic discrimination in forms of education, free will, and economy. But there have been several quotas that the Indian government have established to give more importance to people who are in lower castes.
Thank you. I guess this is where the rebuttal comes in there's only like very recent research done on this, but new research shows that the boundaries that we see in the caste system were actually solidified by the British colonial rulers, who made it India's defining social feature. When they used consensuses to simplify the system, primarily to create a single society with a common law that they could be easily governed. So they wanted a more unified country. It was basically like India was divided into sort of tribes or kingdoms. Like there were kings ruling over different parts of India, which is why I think there's like 23 identified languages, which is it's very crazy. So I think much like what the British did in other countries, they tried to kind of unify and like which made it easy for them to rule. So they use a caste system as a basis of that. So the supposed origin of caste in the Rig Veda, which is the text that was referred before, was most likely added after it was translated to English decades later. So the hierarchy was derived from the Brahmin text. Like the hierarchy did exist, but only like the top society of Brahmins really believed in this, or really believed in that this should be integrated into society. So yeah, the system was, it's a system of categorization was textual and theoretical, and only really existed in scrolls and had no relationship with the reality on the ground. Keep in mind this was pre-colonial, so this reality unfortunately did solidify after or during colonial rule, which is why we see caste discrimination and division right now. So yeah, in the bottom, the text describes that the diversity in like identities and groups where the British just tried to kind of funnel in everyone into one certain place. So continuation of this system. So this is to give a more. I cited this professor because they were the supervised census operation in the Madras presidency in 1871. So they were in India during this time, and I want to read out this quote. So regarding the origin of caste, we can place no reliance upon the statements made in Hindu sacred writings. Whether there was ever a period in which the Hindus were composed of four classes is exceedingly doubtful. So just more evidence to the fact that the system wasn't really on the ground before the British showed up. Social identities were constantly malleable. Like before, a soldier could take a place of the king could take a place of the laborer, people were free to marry. And usually the kings held these sort of marriage ceremonies for their daughters where people from all castes and creeds could show up and participate and have a chance to win the princess's hand, whatever. So that's just an example of there not being too much caste discrimination back then too. And every job, even cleaning toilets or sweeping, to teaching was held to the same importance, which is why there's not a lot of discrimination between them.
Just to add on, before the 18th century, the caste system did exist, but it wasn't hard set in stone. And after the British did come to India, they needed a way to have social order and a way to control the people, but just have social order within the country itself. And because there were so many divisions of the caste system, they kind of oversimplified it into four main categories, which was almost impossible because there were so many caste system, which kind of after the British came, it became the caste of where you were became more solidified and more hard set in stone, and all the flexibilities kind of just went away.
Yeah, thank you. So much like what happened with colorism, the British favored or took into put in place presidential power for people who were of higher caste. So even British showed partiality towards people who were considered higher caste, which created further division between the castes. The next text really solidifies what actually happened. So hierarchy was created, incompatible or mismatched parts were stuck together. So tribes of completely different language and way of life were put together, and obviously that caused a lot of division. The resulting categorical system became rigid during the next century and quarter as the made-up categories came to be associated with real rights. So, yeah, the caste system most likely had no extreme significance before colonization, and we're talking about that, and then it was only solidified after. I wanted to include this quote too by anthropologist Susan Bailey, just to really drive through like the new evidence that showed up. So what she says is, until well into the colonial period, much of the subcontinent was still populated by people from whom the formal distinctions of caste were of only limited importance, even in parts of the so-called Hindu heartland. The institutions and beliefs which are now often described as elements of traditional caste were only just taking shape as recently as the early 18th century. Now, even I was like very surprised and shocked to hear about this because like the caste system was kind of seen as a part of religion, when in reality, like that's not entirely the case. So Mo can talk about the several examples there.
Yeah, so to talk about the flexibility that the caste system had, one of the most famous people who rose from the lowest caste, which was the Dalit, which was the lowest caste group possible. They weren't supposed to be included in the caste system itself because they weren't thought to be as important. They were the outcasts of society, and so B.R. Ambedkar was actually wrote India's constitution, and it showed how important, like how not important caste was in the situation. And he's also a very revered figure, especially among the lower caste people, for rights. Oh, Tanvir, were you?
Yeah. Okay. So this is another example, or this person's another example. His name is K.R. Narayan, and he was the first Dalit to become president. I think this was where it really kind of there was a peak representation for lower caste people, and they were able to. This president was able to advocate for rights for lower caste people. And a lot of reformation was taking place during his presidency. The Reformation, as Mo mentioned before, was that the Indian Constitution has outlawed the practice of untouchability, which was how the Dalits were treated. The Indian government has established special quotas in schools and parliament to aid the lowest jatis. Also, this caste discrimination is not permitted in gaining employment and access to education and other opportunities. And like with the spread of education and like growing urbanism, the influence of caste has declined. A lot of people have been engaged in intercaste marriage, and also being able to rise to ranks of other higher caste people in terms of economy. The caste system really now only exists in rural areas. But even though these reformations were taking place and laws put in place, like there are the systems that were put in still perpetuate injustice and crimes against lower caste people. Like even in the media and such, like the lower caste people are not represented as well, or looked down upon. So there's a lot of movement right now in India to combat colorism and caste discrimination. Yeah. So thank you for listening. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you for the great presentation. I think like one thing that was interesting to me, with all the previous presentations, we talked about culture of a country, right? We talked about like cultures of Asian countries, like specifically, and like we've been somewhat critical of how it might be not very advanced, it might be a little behind, but it just shows how powerful the culture and tradition can be in overcoming even the British rule, which was a fairly powerful rule over the world, and overcoming their rule and basically overcoming those barriers because you have a belief in your culture. Do you think that that belief, that tradition, do you think that still exists today? You know what I'm trying to say? Like that devotion to history and that devotion to what has been common before the British rule. Do you think that plays a role in your lives?
I'm gonna let Mo talk now, like respond to that because I've been talking for a while. So Mo, what do you want?
Wait, can you repeat the question? I didn't fully understand what the question was.
Yeah, I'm just saying that. Do you think that today, okay, in the lives of people, Indian people today, do you think culture and tradition before the British rule still has a huge part? Do people in your family mention tradition or culture, or do you think it's fading away? That's what I'm trying to say. Because it seems that culture has been very engraved in all countries. So yeah.
Yeah, so for personal experience, I do think tradition, especially tradition before British rule, still is like in every part of like my life. Like you walk in the house, you take off your shoes. That's like one type of way to giving to tradition because we want to keep our houses clean. And cleanliness is a huge part of Hinduism itself. And also having fasting days, which is also giving tribute to gods or like not eating any meat. That was also like every like part of my daily life is influenced by tradition and culture itself. Like it may not be evident that it is, but like it's very much still instilled in my life, and I feel like that's very common for other people as well, especially if you're immigrants and your parents did come directly from India. And even if the British did colonize um, a lot, like India itself, a lot of the traditions still stayed the same. Like Hinduism was still Hinduism itself. It may have evolved a little bit because of British colonization, but the same like the values and the tradition that came with Hinduism itself, I think pretty much stayed the same.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with that in terms of like we're still keeping like the original intent of what or spiritual values that Hinduism teaches us for the most part. But there's also been like a cultural revolution, even with classical Indian dance, Bharatanatyam, where it was considered erotic by the British and was abolished. Whereas during this revolution, people like kind of took back culture and modified it, but also continue the tradition of this dance form, even though it was evolved. So I think a lot of ideas that we see in Hinduism right now are like a new or an an evolved version of the actual religion that was presented.
I also feel like culture and tradition is always evolving. So like I don't think any culture or tradition is like entirely just like lost because I feel like lost is too too objective. Like you can't just like lose something because it's more like something that just evolves into something else in terms of like environment and situations and how like people and like the differences and the different like problems people face today.
Yeah, that was actually very interesting on the note. So, do you think, on the other hand, do you see any British influences in your culture, or do you completely despise the British? I'm trying to see where the stance is in regards to the British colonization.
So no, I personally consider I cannot despise the British for whatever they did to India because they thought India was valuable and they wanted India, so they took it for themselves. But I
Used
like
it.
they did use up their resources. They had trade and like spices and stuff like that. But I wouldn't say I despise them. Like if I went to Britain, I wouldn't be like I despise you for your colonization of India, in particular because it's history itself, and history is history. Like it's the past, and there's nothing much I can do to hate them
Or
I
change.
don't know how to like articulate it, but I wouldn't say I would despise the British.
Oh. Okay, yeah, I don't despise them, but I despise the system, some of the systems that are set by them. Okay, on a positive note, the British have abolished systems like sati, which required, so it was in Hindu culture, it was like when like a woman's husband dies, like she must sacrifice herself too in order to maintain her purity. And so I think some of the sexist and erotic practices that were put in place were abolished by the British, which is a good thing, I think. And they also set up railways and educational systems so that it was more available for even lower caste people to join these educational systems. I think transport and education really unified the country, whereas before it was kind of just like a bunch of kingdoms and tribes, but now like you have a unified system of constitution. Yeah, it provided the constitution. But systems of colorism, obviously caste discrimination, and a lot of hatred or hatred towards the religion or the Muslim religion were perpetuated or were like solidified during British colonization, which we're still trying to combat right now. So I think that's something that we're still dealing with.
Yeah, to better answer your question, I wouldn't say we hate the British. I would just say that their influence has just led a lot of impacts that we just still have to combat today, and that's just part of history itself and part of what just comes with India as a country itself.
Oh, and also forgot to mention, you see how like there's so much like there's abject poverty in India. That was also caused by the British with the famine that was created that killed like I don't want to misquote stats, but it was like millions of people died in that famine just because they used farmers for growing only cash crops for their gain instead of like letting them have a livelihood. Yeah, so that also affected even right now. The poverty is like super active. Yeah.
Viplav, do you have any comments on that? Just wondering, what's your perspective?
I would say that all good. I would say that some parts of what's considered Indian tradition now is actually the stuff that came from the British. I would say that's the only thing that would play into daily life. Like in India, this is a weird one, but they used to clean their teeth every night, not at the day. But British people were the ones who did it during the day. So that's how stuff changed. And now usually people just clean their teeth during the day and not at night at all, right? That's like one little thing. So there's like a lot of little things I would say in India that are technically now considered or even thought to be Indian tradition, which was actually just like from British tradition. So I would say there is definitely like a British influence in our lives every day for like Indians in specific, and then probably the world as well.
Also, it's funny because now we brush our teeth the day and the night, so overlapping of different cultures.
You're not speaking for everyone, though.
I'm not speaking for everyone, though.
Yeah, people use like straight up neem twigs to brush their teeth, and apparently it was really good for your teeth. Like your gums were like super strong when you brush your teeth with like neem twigs. You should try it out.
Okay, you guys have any questions? Katie, do you have any questions to ask? No? That was a wonderful presentation. I had No clue. I thought the caste system existed like, I don't know, 3,000 years ago, and it was like I thought it was like embedded in the culture, but no, it was more free, and like the British exploited that. If I'm stating it correctly, exploited that for their own use to be able to rule over the country, which is pretty sad, but it's a very good thing to know about the history of India. And thank you for the awesome presentation. I think it was great, and every time you guys come, we learn new things. So yeah, we hope to put that up on Instagram and hopefully share some of those information with our peers in homeroom. So yeah, thank you for coming, and
Yeah,
hope to see
thank
you
you.
guys next time. Yeah,
Thank
You
you.
guys.
Thank you.
thank you. Bye.
Should I share it with you the presentation?
Oh yes, please.
Yeah, in Mr. Walker's class, we learned the actual religion, and a lot of people were like, "Why is religion so bad?" Mo was called. Okay. Yeah, and I was like really surprised, and I couldn't even stand up for myself or like talk about it, and be like, this is not the truth.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it's really important to like send this message out to teachers and students. So we hopefully have to bug Miss Yates again to do another. Yeah, I've been bugging her right now.
Yes.
What's the thing with the film? You both? Okay.
I don't know how to turn that off. I'm trying to turn that off. Okay.
There's like a little side button for the ringer.
Where?
You have an iPhone, right?
No, I'm talking.
There's this little switch right above the volume button, and you just switch it down.
This is my computer.
Oh,
Just turn off your Bluetooth, I guess.
oh, there's not disturb. Yeah, I don't know if you're on the big what's it called? Big Sur. There's a do not disturb option.
There's that for text, but I don't know if it's there for. I'll figure it out. Sorry.
What?
Next time you're not gonna have any calls.
Okay. Okay.
Wait, what?
Never mind.
Alright.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Tommy. We greatly appreciate it. Did you send it to us?
I was able to share it with you specifically, and I think you can share it with the other.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sounds cool. Okay.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Bye. Okay, Katie, did you make the spreadsheet?
Yeah, I did, but I think they're all from the club? Does that count?
Did you just write everybody's name?
Okay.
Okay. And then do you know where to send that, right? I think it's in the email. I forwarded to you. Okay. Did you record or no?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, cool. Just, whenever you have time, put that on YouTube. Okay. We'll close. So.